20,000 years ago, the oceans of our planet were roughly 120 meters lower than they are today. Enormous areas of what is currently the ocean floor were actually productive and habitable dry land. What if the map of the world you have trusted your entire life is merely a temporary illusion? How would it feel to walk on foot from London to Amsterdam across a vast plain that is now completely swallowed by the North Sea? The Earth that early humans looked out at every morning was a genuinely alien version of the planet we inhabit today. They walked a shifting landscape where coastlines vanished within a single lifetime, and the night sky offered a brilliant absolute darkness. Understanding this profound difference changes how you think about everything our ancestors experienced. Let us journey back into the deep past and look at the magnificent world they actually saw. The first thing you need to understand is water, and specifically where it was located. Today, the oceans of the world cover about 71% of the surface of the planet. We treat this particular depth as normal, because it is the only one we have ever known. However, sea level is not fixed, and it never has been. It responds directly to the amount of water locked up in glaciers and ice sheets on land. When ice builds up, the sea levels drop because water is being removed from the oceans and stored on land as frozen mass. When that ice melts, the sea levels rise as the water returns to the oceans. This cycle has been running for millions of years. The specific moment in time we happen to exist in right now is not representative of the average. During the peak of the last ice age around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower than they are today. 120 meters is not a rounding error. That is a number that rewrites the map of the world so completely that someone looking at both versions side by side would struggle to believe they were the same planet. At a sea level, 120 meters lower. Enormous areas of what are today ocean floor were dry land. They were productive and habitable environments, populated by living creatures. The North Sea, located between Britain and continental Europe, simply did not exist. Britain was not an island. You could walk from London to Amsterdam across a vast plain that archaeologists now call Doggerland. This was a low-lying landscape, composed of rivers and wetlands and dense forests. It was home to human populations for thousands of years before it was swallowed by rising seas around 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. Occasional finds of mammoth bones and stone tools dredged up by fishing nets from the bottom of the North Sea are its ghost. They are the evidence of a world that existed and was lost not to a sudden catastrophe, but to the slow, inexorable rise of the water. Similar stories play out everywhere you look across the ancient globe. The Persian Gulf was largely dry land, featuring a river valley cutting through the exposed continental shelf. People lived and hunted in that valley for tens of thousands of years. The Bering land bridge, known as Beringia, connected Siberia to Alaska. It was not merely a narrow strip of land. It was a subcontinental landmass hundreds of kilometers wide. This massive bridge supported its own distinct ecosystem of woolly mammoths and bison and cave lions. This is the highway that humans almost certainly used to first enter the Americas. It is now buried under the Bering Sea, with no surface trace of the brave people who crossed it. The islands of Southeast Asia were not the scattered archipelago they are today. Sumatra and Java and Borneo were all connected to mainland Asia, forming a single giant peninsula that geologists call Sundaland. This was a tropical landmass larger than India that has since been drowned entirely by rising seas. Australia and New Guinea were joined together into a single enormous continent, which researchers call Sahul. The crossing from Sundaland to Sahul was a monumental event. It was the first time in the history of life that a large-brained mammal deliberately crossed the open ocean in significant numbers. The ancestors of modern Aboriginal Australians made a sea crossing of at least 70 to 90 kilometers. They likely traveled even further around 65,000 years ago. That crossing required specialized watercraft and clear navigational intent. This means the people who did it could look out at the open water and understand in some meaningful way that there was something on the other side worth reaching. That is a remarkable cognitive fact about ancient people. We sometimes still incorrectly imagine as primitive or reactive. They were neither primitive nor reactive because they were skilled sailors. The Mediterranean Sea was smaller and saltier, with completely different coastline configurations along its southern margins. The Red Sea was significantly narrower in several places. Ireland and Britain were both physically connected to continental Europe. Sri Lanka was connected to India by a very broad land bridge. Taiwan was seamlessly connected to mainland China. The coastlines of the world, which we treat as fixed and essentially permanent features of the map, were not fixed at all. They were moving targets shifting over human time scales as ice ages came and went. They drowned familiar territories and exposed new ones in a geological rhythm. Early humans experienced this not as abstract science, but as the lived reality of their world fundamentally changing within a single human lifetime. Here is the profound part that truly deserves to sit with you for a moment. Entire human populations lived out their days on these now drowned landscapes. They built their homes there and raised their children there. They developed their deep knowledge of local plants and animals and vital water sources. They understood their world entirely in terms of specific geographic places that no longer exist above the water. The stories they told about those places and the names they had for specific hills and rivers and hunting grounds were passed down. All of it was transmitted generation after generation as the water relentlessly rose. Eventually, the physical places the stories described were buried beneath the waves. The stories then became, to later generations, something that sounded merely like a myth. There are many researchers who believe that some of the most persistent flood myths of humanity are not pure invention. The biblical flood and the flood story of Mesopotamia and the flood narratives in Hindu tradition all share this core theme. The Aboriginal Australian stories of the sea rising to drown the coastal lands follow the exact same pattern. These are likely distorted but genuine cultural memories of very real events. They recall the absolute drowning of real coastlines where real people lived. These memories were passed down in story form across dozens of generations until the specific geography was ultimately lost. Yet the emotional truth of a world swallowed by water permanently remained. Whether or not you find that compelling, the underlying reality is absolutely not in dispute. The great floods happened, and the beautiful lands truly went under. People were forced to pack up and move. Whether the memory of those specific inundations survived across thousands of years of oral transmission is genuinely one of the most interesting open questions in the archaeology of human memory. Now, let us shift our gaze and look up at the ancient night sky. The night sky over a Paleolithic campsite was something that no person alive today in any city on Earth has ever seen with their own eyes. This is not because the sky itself was fundamentally different, since the stars were exactly where they were. It is because the darkness was absolute in a way that modern humans have essentially no reference for. Light pollution is so pervasive in the contemporary world that roughly a third of humanity cannot even see the Milky Way from where they live. The artificial orange glow of cities on the horizon is visible from hundreds of kilometers away. True and complete and unpolluted darkness is incredibly rare today. It is the kind of darkness where your eyes fully adapt and the sky becomes a breathtaking three-dimensional vault. It becomes layered with endless depth and crowded with stars and numbers that seem completely impossible. This is a profound experience that most modern humans have never had. As long as they live where they live, they never will. Ancient humans experienced this absolute majesty every single night of their lives. It was not a special occasion or a rare camping trip to the wilderness. It was simply a normal Tuesday evening. The Milky Way would have been a dominant and awe-inspiring feature of the night sky. It was not a faint smudge, barely visible on a good night. It was a blazing, textured band of light complex enough for the human eye to see real physical structure within it. Dark lanes of cosmic dust and intensely bright clusters of stars were clearly visible to the naked eye. The massive galactic disk seemed to press down on you overhead, with its staggering sheer number of visible stars. Individual planets were among the absolute brightest objects in the sky. They moved in ways that were visibly different from the fixed background stars. This complex movement made them obvious and notable anomalies to any regular observer. Meteor showers and bright comets and shimmering auroras at higher latitudes were all visible with absolute clarity. They possessed an intensity that modern humans rarely encounter, even in supposedly dark rural areas far from modern cities. This immaculate sky mattered not just for its breathtaking aesthetic beauty, but for highly practical reasons. Navigation by the stars and the precise tracking of seasons and lunar cycles were essential. They used the sky for planning long migrations and accurately predicting seasonal food availability. The night sky was a vital survival tool, just as much as it was a visual spectacle. Hunter-gatherer peoples, who deeply understood the sky in detail, were significantly better equipped to survive. They could perfectly plan travel and time their movements to the shifting rhythms of the natural world. They could confidently predict the seasonal availability of the crucial resources that their very survival depended upon. Astronomical knowledge was never a purely academic pursuit for them. It was the fundamental infrastructure of their ancient survival. The Pleiades star cluster appears prominently in the mythological and navigational traditions of diverse cultures across the globe. It is found in the ancient traditions of cultures from Australia to North America to Africa and to Europe. It is almost always intimately associated with the exact same critical seasonal events. It safely marks the exact time for planting and harvest and the movement of fish runs and the beginning of the vital rains. This near-universal cultural significance across separated continents is not a simple coincidence. It reflects the profound fact that these 7 bright stars served a critical purpose. They predictably rise and set at highly specific times of the year with a precision you can completely rely on. They naturally served as a flawless calendar visible to anyone who looked up on a clear night. Our ancestors confidently looked up every single night with eyes perfectly adapted to a deep darkness we have largely engineered out of our modern existence. They possessed brilliant minds that were acutely primed to find meaning and vital patterns in absolutely everything they observed. Now, let us deeply explore the magnificent animals that roamed this ancient earth. The world that early modern humans inhabited was completely full of large animals in a way that the modern world simply is not. The profound difference in scale and sheer physical abundance is almost impossible to overstate. The scientific term for these massive creatures is megafauna. This term specifically refers to animals weighing above roughly 44 kilograms. In the Pleistocene epoch, megafauna were incredibly abundant and diverse. They were present on every single continent in numbers and varieties that utterly dwarf anything alive today. In Africa, where our amazing species first evolved, the megafauna were the most extensive. African animals had the longest unbroken evolutionary coexistence with our human lineage. They logically had the most time to develop cautious behavioral responses to developing human hunting techniques. Even so, the Africa of 100,000 years ago was significantly richer in large animal diversity than the Africa of today. There were multiple unique species of elephant and multiple massive species of rhinoceros roaming the land. There were giant buffalo roaming the endless plains with terrifying horns spanning 2 meters across. There were enormous lethal predators, including several terrifying species of big cat that are now entirely extinct. The sheer biological diversity was staggering even on the continent, where these magnificent beasts survived the longest. In Europe and Asia, the ecological picture was even more dramatic and intensely terrifying. Woolly mammoths roamed the frozen landscapes as towering, full-sized adults. They stood up to 3.5 meters tall at the muscular shoulder. They wielded massive curved tusks up to 4 meters long and weighed 6 tons or more. Fierce woolly rhinoceroses were perfectly built for surviving these brutally cold environments. Massive cave lions, which were significantly larger than any modern lion, hunted across the exact same landscape as fragile human groups. Fearsome cave hyenas were significantly bigger than spotted hyenas today and competed directly with humans for scavenged carcasses. Giant deer possessed unbelievable majestic antler spans of 3.7 meters. That massive span is wider than a modern car is long. They somehow managed to navigate dense forested terrain with that extraordinary and cumbersome architecture balanced on their heads. This biological mystery remains one of the more puzzling evolutionary engineering choices found in the entire fossil record. Colossal cave bears were enormous, powerful animals that sought out the exact same dark cave systems that vulnerable humans also used for winter shelter. This intense physical competition made unoccupied caves a vital living resource that was entirely worth fighting and bleeding for. Straight-tusked elephants were forest-dwelling giants that actually grew even larger than the famous woolly mammoths. Aurochs were the massive wild cattle ancestral to every single domestic cow breed alive today. They proudly stood nearly 2 meters tall at the muscular shoulder, with a highly aggressive temperament that matched their massive size exactly. When early humans finally moved into Europe around 45,000 years ago, they walked straight into this intimidating environment. It was a brutal landscape, completely defined by giant, dangerous animals that no modern human has ever shared a continent with. The sheer, overwhelming scale and density of large animal life would have been completely staggering by any modern standard. Vast, majestic herds of mammoths were easily visible, moving constantly across the open, freezing tundra. Deadly, aggressive packs of cave hyenas and lions constantly competed for the very same bloody carcasses that hungry humans desperately wanted. Majestic giant deer could be seen quietly browsing at the dark forest edge in the fading red evening light. The breathtaking and immortal paintings on the ancient stone walls of Lascaux and Chauvet are not works of imagination or simple artistic license. They are highly accurate and emotional portraits from life, made by observant people who watch these animals constantly. They deeply knew their complex organic shapes and subtle, sudden movements with the deep intimacy that comes from sharing a brutal world with them. They intimately shared a vibrant world, with creatures that were simultaneously their vital, sustaining food and their deadliest, most terrifying predators. In the Americas, the situation was equally astonishing when brave humans first arrived around 15,000 years ago, or possibly even earlier. They immediately found megafauna so incredibly abundant that it makes modern Africa look completely empty and restrained by comparison. They cautiously encountered massive woolly mammoths and towering grazing mastodons. They found giant ground sloths, literally the size of small elephants. These massive sloths were slow-moving, but so unbelievably large and tough that very few predators could ever reliably take down an adult. Glyptodonts were heavily armored defensive animals, roughly the size of small modern cars. They were essentially giant prehistoric armadillos equipped with heavy spiked tails that they brutally used as devastating defensive weapons. Terrifying short-faced bears prowled the open landscape with exceptionally long, muscular legs. They absolutely possessed a faster running speed than any single modern bear alive today. That is a truly terrifying and sobering reality, worth deeply considering for a silent moment. Lethal American lions and incredibly fast American cheetahs hunted the wide-open grassy plains. Fearsome dire wolves relentlessly hunted their exhausted prey in exceptionally large and highly coordinated packs. Wild, energetic horses and camels and tapirs were all completely native to the beautiful Americas, long before their eventual tragic extinction. Nightmarish saber-toothed cats violently stalked the land, with lethal canine teeth measuring up to 28 centimeters long. Yet tragically, almost all of this incredible biodiversity was completely gone within a few thousand years of sustained human presence in each distinct region. The exact primary cause of the megafauna extinction remains fiercely and passionately debated among smart scientists today. It may have been rapid shifting climate change, or relentless organized human hunting, or some lethal combination of both factors. However, the exact timing is incredibly and suspiciously consistent across multiple completely different continents. This striking mathematical consistency makes it very difficult to fully exonerate our own intelligent species from the historical blame. Wherever humans finally arrived in significant numbers, the large, majestic animals completely disappeared on a geological timescale that amounts to almost immediately. The vibrant, noisy world our ancestors inhabited was completely defined by the majestic, heavy presence of those animals. The quiet, empty world that sadly came after was completely defined by their permanent, tragic absence. We are now so completely and utterly accustomed to that silent absence that we do not even recognize it as a profound ecological loss. The lush vegetation and flora of the ancient world were completely different too. This difference gracefully goes well beyond a simple change in basic botanical species composition. During the freezing depths of the last ice age, what is now the barren, burning Sahara Desert was not a desert at all. It was a lush and incredibly vibrant landscape, composed of endless green grasslands and deep blue lakes and flowing rivers. This beautiful era is famously known as the Green Sahara. It was a long period, roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, when a massive natural shift in the African monsoon system occurred. This monumental climatic shift brought dramatically more life-giving rainfall to the northern sandy regions of Africa. It completely and magically transformed one of the most brutal deserts of the world into a highly habitable and green savanna. This vibrant grassy savanna was heavily populated by bathing hippos and swimming crocodiles and roaming elephants. Thriving human communities of proud cattle herders and skilled fishing groups lived happily beside massive freshwater lakes that simply no longer exist today. Beautiful faded rock art left behind by those ancient creative people still miraculously survives in remote rocky places. It can be clearly found on the massive plateau located in modern Algeria. The vivid ancient art clearly shows joyful people herding cattle and swimming in deep, cool water. It beautifully depicts a wide variety of amazing animals that are now entirely absent from the Sahara by thousands of miles. The massive, unforgiving desert that confidently seems like a totally permanent geographical fact was actually very recently a fundamentally different place. When the life-giving heavy rains finally stopped and it rapidly dried out, the people who lived in it had absolutely no choice but to leave. Many of them likely moved desperately toward the fertile, wet Nile Valley. This massive sudden migration contributed directly to the intense building population pressures and growing social complexity in that small region. That extreme competitive pressure eventually helped produce the incredible awe-inspiring civilization of ancient Egypt. The Green Sahara did not simply dry out quietly and peacefully in the background. It aggressively and violently pushed massive numbers of panicked people somewhere else to survive. The vast mysterious Amazon rainforest is often romantically described today as a perfectly pristine and untouched green wilderness. However, it shows increasing and absolutely undeniable scientific evidence of having been substantially managed by human hands. It was carefully purposefully modified by indigenous human populations for many thousands of years long, before any European contact. There are massive dark patches of unusually fertile earth, widely distributed across the entire vast Amazon basin. This incredibly rich, unnatural soil appears to directly result from long-term, deliberate human habitation and highly advanced, careful soil management practices. Massive, strange geometric earthworks are now clearly visible beneath the dense dark forest canopy. They strongly and clearly indicate organized and deliberate ancient landscape modification on a truly significant and monumental scale. What confidently looks like untouched and wild nature to our untrained modern eyes was in significant part a carefully loved and managed landscape. It is a vibrant, ancient garden whose original, careful, skilled managers are tragically no longer there to tend it. Aggressive nature rapidly reclaimed that fertile land over 5 centuries of devastating, tragic depopulation. But just because wild nature eventually reclaimed it does not mean that wild nature originally made it that way. Now, let us quietly consider something that almost never comes up in common discussions of the ancient lost world. We absolutely must take a moment to talk about the flowing rivers. The complex branching river systems of the Pleistocene were substantially and completely different from those we see today. In many different diverse regions across the globe, the rivers were vastly larger and far more numerous. They were also much more dangerously volatile and unpredictable in their raging, violent flow. They were heavily aggressively fed by massive amounts of melting glacial water and a completely different global precipitation pattern. The ancient Green Sahara was completely full of rushing rivers that are now nothing more than dusty, dry trenches. These are haunting, silent ghost valleys, carved deep into the hard rock by water that has not flowed there in many long millennia. The completely dry Arabian Peninsula once proudly hosted massive river systems that have now completely surrendered to the endless blowing desert sands. Ancient green Europe featured massive rivers draining completely across what is now the dark, cold seabed of the North Sea. They eventually smoothly met the River Thames and the River Rhine in a massive combined drainage system flowing north straight across Doggerland. These ancient, powerful rivers were the absolute essential superhighways of the massive prehistoric world. They reliably generously provided fresh drinking water and abundant swimming food and highly navigable smooth travel routes. They gracefully offered the absolutely reliable vital resource concentrations that roaming hunter-gatherer groups desperately depended on for their survival. Many of the major early dense population concentrations in prehistoric Europe and Asia were located exactly along fertile river valleys that still exist today. But many other lost communities were situated strictly along powerful mighty rivers that are now completely forever gone. They are unfortunately either drowned forever under the rising dark seas or completely brutally dried up by the violently shifting global climate. The entire complex human geography of the ancient world was completely intelligently organized around a massive global branching river network. That incredible ancient network has been substantially totally dismantled by the exact same violent, rapid climate shifts that ended the long ice age and raised the global seas. The global, unpredictable climate itself was fundamentally different, in terrifying ways that went far beyond mere melting ice sheets and shifting, vanishing coastlines. The brutal Pleistocene epoch was heavily characterized by incredibly rapid and violent, chaotic oscillations between freezing cold glacial and slightly warmer, interglacial periods. Some of these massive, brutal climatic transitions happened over incredibly short, terrifying timescales of merely a few centuries. For the strong, resilient humans desperately living through those brutal transitions, the environment was profoundly, totally unstable. The familiar, safe world of their young childhood could be visibly and drastically completely different from the completely altered, terrifying world of their old age. Dense, dark, silent forests could be seen rapidly, aggressively advancing over the open, sunny grasslands where they had freely, happily hunted as young, playing children. Massive rushing rivers that had flowed heavily year-round in the strong memory of their parents were suddenly completely sadly drying up into mud. The reliable, safe seasonal rhythms were violently, dramatically shifting in totally unpredictable and terrifying ways. This made their deeply protected, inherited ancestral knowledge about exactly when to move and where to find food suddenly completely, totally unreliable. The physical, chaotic world was absolutely not a stable or quiet, peaceful background setting for their lives. It was a chaotic and constantly aggressively changing active character in the dramatic, desperate story of their daily survival. Some smart researchers strongly, convincingly argue that this intense, unforgiving environmental instability was a primary, massive evolutionary driver. They deeply believe it directly, powerfully fueled our extraordinary, unique human cognitive evolution. Our unique, incredible human capacity for extreme intelligent behavioral flexibility and complex logical forward planning was forged right here in this fire. Our profound, amazing ability for rapidly learning and transmitting complex, essential knowledge was violently sharpened by the brutal, constant pressure of this chaotic world. It was a fiercely hostile world that frequently dangerously changed much faster than slow, quiet biological genetics could possibly quickly track. Human intelligent groups that could hold on to incredibly complex knowledge and rapidly, creatively revise it miraculously survived. They smartly revised their tested strategies in immediate, direct response to brutal, terrifying new conditions, and actively, loudly transmitted those updated strategies across multiple generations. They barely miraculously survived the violent, deadly environmental transitions that completely ruthlessly eliminated other groups that simply, sadly, could not adapt fast enough. The incredible, beautiful human intelligence that feels so distinctly and uniquely proudly ours may actually be at its very root a pure, desperate climate adaptation. It is a highly beautifully advanced brain specifically carefully built for a chaotic, violent world that simply, absolutely would not sit still. There is something almost completely, totally vertiginous and deeply, profoundly humbling about that specific, amazing idea. The profound, elegant mental capacity that actively, effortlessly allows you to deeply, completely understand this exact sentence right now. The impressive ability to gracefully, easily hold totally abstract, complex concepts securely in your mind. The creative power to clearly, vividly imagine a distant, approaching future you have not even actually lived yet. That incredible, brilliant capacity may completely, totally owe its very fragile existence to the brutal, freezing ice ages It owes absolutely everything to the desperate and totally unforgiving heavy cognitive demands, those freezing ages, placed entirely upon your brave ancient ancestors. You are actively, beautifully thinking your modern complex thoughts with a brilliant complex brain that was literally structurally built by the violent weather. The breathtaking, pure sounds of the beautiful ancient world also truly absolutely deserve a quiet, respectful moment of reflection. This is the one specific dimension of the deep, distant past that we can least effectively, accurately reconstruct today. It is the tragic, heartbreaking aspect of our deep history that we have most completely and totally permanently lost. Before the loud, aggressive invention of the smoking internal combustion engine, and before humming, buzzing electrical infrastructure everywhere, before the constant low mechanical hum underlying every single waking moment of modern life, in every single inhabited place on this earth. The ancient quiet world was incredibly acoustically pure and open in a profound, wonderful way that it simply sadly no longer is today. The beautiful sounds that naturally filled the fresh air were natural organic sounds entirely. It was the crisp sound of the howling wind and rushing clear water and echoing distant animal calls and buzzing, singing insects. It was the deep, rumbling sound of massive dark weather fronts slowly, dramatically moving across a vast, empty, open landscape. You could easily, clearly hear the subtle, soft approach of a walking, heavy animal at a truly significant far distance. The specific, frantic, warned behavior of local small birds clearly, loudly signaled a dangerous, hungry predator's hidden, terrifying presence nearby. There was a very specific, totally terrifying, heavy quality of absolute perfect silence that clearly screamed to you that something massive was very dangerously close by. These were totally, completely readable, acoustic, clear signals in a pure, silent environment that had absolutely no artificial background, loud noise to mask them. Early smart humans were deeply, naturally embedded in that vivid, pure soundscape, and they read it flawlessly and totally fluently. They listened constantly, automatically, with complete, perfect, and immediate, highly practical comprehension of exactly precisely what every single tiny sound meant. The deep, dark green forest was talking constantly to them all the time. They completely, deeply understood its ancient, complex, and very beautiful language. The beautiful wild world that brave ancient humans looked out at every single day was also a world completely, totally without recorded written history in our modern sense. They absolutely did not know they were currently physically living deep inside a massive global ice age. They absolutely did not know the magnificent, towering woolly mammoths would be completely tragically gone within just a few thousand short years. They absolutely did not know the massive dark sea was incrementally but relentlessly constantly rising right under their walking tired feet. They absolutely did not know that the solid dry land their joyous playing children ran on would soon become the dark wet floor of a shallow sea in just a dozen generations. They lived entirely and completely in the immediate pressing present of their magnificent overwhelming world. They lived with a pure sharp immediacy and a deep, profound intimacy that our modern, comfortable knowledge of deep geological time makes completely, totally impossible for us to fully replicate. And yet, despite absolutely all this, they permanently, lovingly left behind haunting, beautiful evidence of something that looks unmistakably exactly like pure magical human wonder. The beautiful, complex cave paintings are the absolute most dramatic and breathtaking emotional evidence of this exact feeling. Massive, beautiful animals are beautifully, perfectly rendered with an incredible artistic, undeniable skill and a deep, loving attention to living, graceful movement. This breathtaking ancient art required incredibly careful quiet and repeated intense observation of real, living, breathing subjects out in the dangerous open field. The stark emotional handprints, carefully, lovingly stenciled on dark, rough cave walls, can be magically found across every single currently inhabited continent. They are clearly, desperately saying in the absolute, most direct and intensely emotional language possible that they were alive and they were here. They are passionately saying, "This was my living hand, and I existed happily in this specific magical place, and I desperately wanted you to know it." The delicate, small carved figures and the thoughtful, respectful grave goods deeply, profoundly move us even today. The red ochre-stained bones of the deeply, fiercely loved and carefully, respectfully buried dead loudly imply something incredibly profound. They strongly imply incredibly complex, deep beliefs about the terrifying mystery of dark death and about exactly what ultimately followed it. They clearly reveal a deep, beautiful belief about the supreme emotional significance of a loved person's physical remaining body. This raw, pure emotion is deeply and instantly completely recognizable even across 100,000 long years of cold, silent, dark distance. They proudly looked out at that extraordinary and teeming and completely, absolutely unpolluted natural world. They gazed deeply upon an incomprehensibly, totally alive, vibrant planet, entirely full of majestic beasts. They stared silently at the massive, hairy, woolly mammoths, wandering slowly on the freezing, empty, open tundra. They looked proudly up at the brilliant, sparking Milky Way, blazing proudly brightly, without any artificial light competition overhead. They walked the beautiful sandy ancient coastlines that had not yet gone permanently sadly under the dark freezing water. And looking at absolutely all of this pure majesty, they physically felt something deep inside their hearts that we would immediately and perfectly recognize. We just tragically simply cannot open our eyes and physically see the magnificent, pristine, lost world that they were seeing.